Imagine holding a single piece of paper with 14 zeros printed across the front. $100 trillion. It is an official banknote, printed on high-quality security paper, complete with a watermarked eagle and a metallic strip woven through the center. To a citizen of the United States, a number that large sounds like the budget of the federal government or the entire economic output of a medium-sized continent. But if you were standing on a street corner in Harare, Zimbabwe, in late 2008, this staggering piece of paper did not make you a billionaire. It barely made you capable of buying a single loaf of bread. And if you waited in line at the grocery store for too long, the price of that bread would likely double before you even reached the cash register, leaving your $100 trillion note entirely useless. This was not a Monopoly game, and it was not a hypothetical thought experiment in an economics classroom. It was the daily, terrifying reality for millions of people. It is one of the most extreme financial events in recorded history, a moment when the basic concept of money completely unraveled. But this collapse was not caused by a natural disaster, a sudden war, or an unavoidable global depression. It was a methodical, step-by-step destruction of a national economy engineered by the very people employed to protect it. To understand how a modern nation accidentally destroys its own money, we have to perform a forensic autopsy on the death of the Zimbabwean dollar. To comprehend the sheer scale of this financial collapse, you first have to understand the height from which this economy fell. You have to rewind to the early 1980s. At that time, the Zimbabwean dollar was not a joke. In fact, it was actually worth more than the United States dollar. Economic records from the era show a nation that was widely considered the breadbasket of Africa. The country possessed an incredibly robust, highly productive agricultural machine. Commercial farms stretched across the landscape, generating massive, predictable harvests of tobacco, wheat, corn, and cotton. These farms did not just feed the domestic population, they were massive export engines. Train cars and trucks packed with agricultural goods constantly crossed the borders, selling these products to neighboring countries and international markets. This is the crucial foundation of the story, because this is how a country actually builds wealth. Wealth is not paper money. Wealth is physical goods, services, and production that other people actually want to buy. Because Zimbabwe was producing so much physical wealth, international buyers had to purchase the country's currency to buy its goods, which kept the Zimbabwean dollar strong, stable, and highly respected on the global stage. The national bank accounts were filled with foreign reserves. The shelves in the supermarkets were fully stocked, and the economic future looked remarkably secure. The cracks in this foundation did not appear in the banking sector. They appeared in the soil. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, the political climate in Zimbabwe began to shift aggressively. The ruling government, led by President Robert Mugabe, was facing increasing political opposition and a restless population. In a move designed to secure political loyalty and maintain an iron grip on power, the government initiated a radical and rapid land reform program. The stated goal was to redistribute land from minority white commercial farmers to the black majority population. However, the execution of this policy was rapid, chaotic, and entirely decoupled from agricultural realities. Productive, highly complex commercial farms were seized by force, often handed over to political loyalists, military veterans, and citizens who had absolutely no capital to buy seeds, no heavy machinery to harvest crops, and no experience managing massive agricultural operations. Almost overnight, the breadbasket of Africa simply stopped growing food. This is the exact moment the fatal economic chain reaction began, even if it was invisible to the naked eye. When you suddenly destroy a country's ability to produce goods, you destroy its ability to export. When Zimbabwe stopped exporting tobacco and corn, international buyers stopped sending United States dollars and British pounds into the country. This concept is vital to understand. A country like Zimbabwe cannot buy imported oil, electricity, or life-saving medical supplies with its own local currency. International oil markets do not accept Zimbabwean dollars. They demand United States dollars or other major global currencies. So, to survive, a country must constantly earn foreign money by selling things to the world. When the farms died, the flow of foreign money into Zimbabwe simply evaporated. This created an immediate existential crisis for the government. With no exports, businesses began to close. And when businesses close, the government can no longer collect taxes. The national treasury was suddenly running empty. But the government still had massive, unavoidable bills to pay. They had to pay the salaries of hundreds of thousands of civil servants. More importantly, they had to pay the military and the national police force. In any nation facing political instability, missing the military payroll is the fastest way to trigger a government overthrow. The rulers of Zimbabwe were backed into a corner of their own making. They could admit that their land policies had destroyed the economy, drastically cut government spending, and likely lose their grip on power. Or they could take the seemingly easy way out. They could order the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe to turn on the printing presses and simply create the money they needed out of thin air. They chose the printing press. At first, printing money feels like magic. The government printed fresh stacks of Zimbabwean dollars and handed them out to the soldiers, the police, and the government workers. The immediate crisis was averted. But this is where the cold, unforgiving mathematics of economics took over. When the government printed this new money, they did not create any new wealth. There was no new food on the shelves, no new fuel at the gas stations, and no new exports leaving the country. They simply increased the amount of paper money competing for the exact same limited supply of physical goods. Imagine a pizza cut into 8 slices. If you suddenly decide to cut that same pizza into 80 slices, you do not have more food. You just have much smaller slices. By flooding the economy with newly printed cash, the government was violently diluting the purchasing power of every single dollar already in existence. As the newly printed money flooded the streets, shopkeepers noticed that their costs were rising, so they raised the prices of their groceries, clothing, and hardware. To keep up with these rising prices, the government had to print even larger batches of money to pay their employees. This created a doom loop. Inflation shifted from a creeping concern to an unstoppable freight train. Prices did not just rise every year. They began rising every month, then every week, and eventually every single day. This triggered a devastating psychological shift within the population known as the velocity of money. Citizens quickly realized that the money in their pockets was essentially melting ice. If you received your paycheck at 8 in the morning, you had to spend it by noon, because by the evening, that exact same paycheck would buy only half as much food. People stopped saving entirely. They rushed to convert paper money into anything with physical, lasting value. They bought canned beans, cooking oil, soap, or foreign currencies on the black market. This frantic, desperate spending only accelerated the inflation rate, pushing the economy into the rare and terrifying territory of hyperinflation. Instead of turning off the printing presses, the government decided to fight the laws of economics with the threat of physical force. They instituted strict price controls. Government officials and armed police were sent into grocery stores and electronics shops, aggressively ordering business owners to lower their prices back to normal levels. On the surface, to a terrified public, this might have looked like the government protecting the people. But forensically, it was the final blow to the legitimate economy. If a shopkeeper bought a bag of flour from a supplier for $50, but the government forced him to sell it for $20, the shopkeeper took a massive loss. After a few days of this, shopkeepers did the only logical thing a human being can do in that situation. They sold their remaining inventory and then simply never restocked the shelves. They locked their doors and went home. The grocery stores of Zimbabwe became vast, hollow museums of empty metal shelving. Because the legitimate stores were empty, the entire economy plunged into the shadows. A massive, chaotic black market emerged. Citizens had to navigate a dark economy just to find toothpaste or cooking oil, and the transactions were conducted in massive, brick-sized stacks of increasingly worthless paper. The physical logistics of hyperinflation became a daily nightmare. Wallets were completely useless. People had to carry their cash in heavy backpacks, duffel bags, and eventually, literal wheelbarrows. There are documented accounts of individuals leaving a wheelbarrow full of cash outside a store, only to come back and find that a thief had dumped the trillions of dollars onto the dirt and stolen the wheelbarrow, because the empty wheelbarrow was worth vastly more than the mountain of cash it contained. Bank clerks stopped counting money entirely. It took too long. Instead, they put stacks of bills on heavy-duty scales and weighed them. The Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, led by Governor Gideon Gono, refused to stop the presses. As prices added zeros, the bank had to print new denominations to keep up. They printed millions, then billions, then trillions. They printed money so fast that they actually ran out of the foreign currency required to import the specialized security paper and magnetic ink from the companies in Germany that supplied them. They were literally running out of real money to print their fake money. The banking software and ATM machines across the country began to physically crash because their computer systems were not programmed to process transactions with that many zeros. By January 2009, the absurdity reached its absolute mathematical limit. The government officially issued the $100 trillion note. It was an admission of total defeat. Shortly after this note was released, the entire system simply snapped. The citizens of Zimbabwe, exhausted and impoverished, completely abandoned their national currency. They refused to accept it for any transaction. In a desperate move to stabilize the country, the government officially legalized the use of foreign currencies. Overnight, the United States dollar and the South African rand became the actual money of Zimbabwe. And the moment the country adopted a currency that the Zimbabwean government could not print, the hyperinflation stopped. It did not slow down over months or years. It vanished immediately. Products slowly returned to the store shelves, and prices stabilized because the money supply was finally anchored to reality instead of a printing press. When we step back and perform the final autopsy on the Zimbabwean dollar, the realization is chilling because it forces us to reconsider the paper in our own wallets. This collapse reveals the deepest, most uncomfortable truth about modern finance. Money is not wealth. Money is simply a shared psychological illusion. It is a measuring stick, a socially agreed upon ticket that allows you to claim a piece of the actual wealth that a society produces. When a government destroys the underlying farms, factories, and businesses that create real value, the wealth disappears. But if that same government keeps printing millions of paper tickets to claim that vanished wealth, the tickets do not magically create food. They simply become worthless pieces of paper, reflecting the emptiness of the economy they represent. The $100 trillion note remains one of the greatest economic warnings in human history. It proves, with brutal clarity, that a government can print as much currency as it wants, but it can never, under any circumstances, print wealth.